Hi, and welcome to the second video in our PowerShell series where we're creating a dashboard using PSWriteHTML for Active Directory. So in the first video, we've created a very simple dashboard that shows our Active Directory forest information. So here's what we built in the last video. So this is just a very simple dashboard that will actually go ahead and show us our forest information for our Active Directory and a list of all our domain controllers. Now, if you haven't seen that video, I would definitely recommend checking that video before watching this video because we're just going to be adding on to that last video. Now, in case you are wondering, this script will actually function for multiple domains. So you can see that mine right now only has one domain. But if you do have a forest that has 2, 3, or more domains, this script will actually work. It will actually show you all the domains that you have. Which one is your root domain. It'll show you all the global catalogs. It will show you all the domain controllers. Today, what we're actually going to be doing is adding in the domain specific details. More specifically, what we're going to be adding in is very similar. As we can see, we have the forest information, and then we have our specific domain information, this one for jacked.ca. We will be displaying the domain controllers for that domain only. And then we will also be actually grabbing the default password policy that is on that domain. And we will be grabbing any fine-grained password policies in that domain as well. So you can go ahead and look at all the different password policies that are available for that domain. So let's go ahead and let's actually get started on creating this version of the dashboard based on the script that we had on the last video. So here's the script from the last video. So we're going to be doing quite a bit of changes to make sure that we can actually accommodate this new dashboard with the multiple tabs. So we're going to be changing some of the variables, but a lot of the stuff will actually stay fairly the same, but we will be making quite a few changes. So I'm going to try to make those changes as clear as possible, but do feel free to rewind and rewatch as needed or slow down the video if I'm going a little bit too fast, but I will be trying to go fairly methodically across all these changes. So what we first want to do, of course, as we saw that we had tabs, so we want to go ahead and create the tab for our forest around what we already have, because what we already have is going to be in the forest tab. So what we can actually do here is in the new HTML bracket here before the section, what we're going to be wanting to do is do a new HTML tab. And then what we can actually do is give it the name of forest. And then just go ahead and do an open curly bracket. And what I like to do is I like to then just highlight everything that's going to be inside of that curly bracket here and just move it one tab over. And then let's go ahead and let's close our curly bracket here. So there is our first tab. Let me just move this down a little bit. That will actually help because we don't really need any output in this video. So we have our first tab, and you can always like collapse these down. So you can see that we have our first tab and we have our section in here. So now we need to go ahead and create our other tabs, which will actually be the domain. So we can't create these tabs by hand. I mean, you can, but if you're really wanting to be this script to be very dynamic, to where all we really ever have to do is change the forest name here, deploy to the environment, hit run, and then it will build the dashboard on that environment. We can't really be doing things manually, as in typing out each domain here, each name of the domain in the tab. So we actually want to create these dynamically through a for each loop. Now we already have our domains here, so we can use this, but what I'm actually going to be doing, since we're going to be storing a lot of information for each domain, it's going to be a lot easier for me to create an array of objects, and those objects are going to contain the domain name, they're going to contain the domain controllers for each domain. We're going to be storing the default password policy, the fine-grained password policy for each domain in this array. So this comes for the first change from our previous video here. So instead of having all domain controllers equaling to an array list here, what I actually want to do is just call it all domain info. And that's going to be equal to our array list. Now, what's going to happen here is this part is going to change as well. So we're going to do for each domain and domains. That part doesn't change at all. But what we're actually going to be doing is, let's just hit enter in here. So in here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating another variable. We're going to call it domain controllers. And we're going to make that equal to getAD domain controller server domain, and then the filter star. That works. And then what we're going to want to do is we are just going to want to create a new object here. So we're going to create an object called entry. We're going to call it new object, and then the type name. Now there are many ways to create objects. If you've been following the channel for a while, this is usually the way that I create objects for the videos. I just find it a little bit easier to follow along. So once we have the type name, we're going to put PS custom object. Now we have our entry object, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do an add member on the input object of entry. So we're adding a member to the entry object. The member type, we're going to put it as a note property. And then the name, we are going to put the name here as domain. And then the value for that is just going to be the domain variable. We're going to add another member here. Once again, on the same object, because we want to make this object the object of the domain, basically. So once we have another note property, we're going to put the name in here. And for the name for this one, we're going to put in domain controllers. And then the value for that, we're going to put domain controllers. And we can go ahead, we can actually remove this line now. And we can actually say all domain info dot add. And we're going to add the entry in here. So we're adding the entry to our array list. Now what's going to happen is we're going to have to change this all domain controllers table. We don't have to change a whole lot, but what we do need to change is this variable is now going to change to all domain info. And we're going to do dot domain controllers. So what this is going to do is it's going to actually pre-select the domain controllers property for each of the objects that are in here. So it's going to be selecting all the domain controllers, and then we're just piping that to that same select statement. So everything is going to look identical. So we can actually take a look at see what this would actually look like here. So if we actually just run this here, and it is all done. So now if we look at all domain info, now of course this for us will just be one domain, but we can go ahead, we can actually take a look at it here. We can see domain, we can see domain controllers. So everything there is good. And then if we look at the all domain controllers table, we actually see all the info for the domain controller. Now again, if you have multiple domains, you will actually see this with all your different domains. So that is actually super awesome. And we don't actually need to change anything else in the code right now to actually support this. But what we will be doing is let's go ahead and let's create all those tabs now. So what we can actually do is do a for each domain in all domain info. And then we can have a curly bracket here. Now here's where we're going to be creating all the different tabs that we need. So we're going to do a new HTML tab, and we're going to create it with the name. And just to give you guys a little bit of an idea here, we're just going to go ahead, we're going to comment this out. We're just going to loop through this just so we can get the dot notation working. And we can go ahead and put in a variable wrapper in here. And we're going to look at what the domain variable has for us. So it has the domain and the domain controllers. So what we want to do is actually just name our tab the domain. And then we can actually just go ahead and do a open and closing curly bracket. So now what we actually should have is, instead of having a page where all we had was just the actual forest information, we will actually have everything regarding the domain. Not everything regarding the domain, but we're going to have the tab created. I'm just going to name this a slightly different file here so we can actually compare the two. So let's go ahead, let's run this here. Perfect. And what we can actually do is just copy paste this and run this and just remove the part 2 so we can actually see the difference of what we've actually done. So here is what we've just done. So we've actually, now you can see that we've already added the tabs just now. If I click on the tab, it is empty. We haven't added that information in yet, but at least the tab is created and we have those objects that we can actually now store all that information, which is going to be contained for each domain. It's going to make things a lot easier in the future videos as well, because we have this array list of all of our domain information. So now we wanted to add the default domain password policy and the fine-grained password policies for each domain. So I have videos on this already on my channel on how to get those, but we will be going ahead and doing that in this video as well. I won't be skipping anything over, but I do have some quick tips on a lot of Active Directory controls. If you guys are interested in those, they are on the channel. So any system administrators watching this, or people that are trying to become system administrators and work with Active Directory on a regular basis, some of those could be very useful for you guys. So please check those out. So let's go ahead and let's fetch our default password policy first. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called default password policy. And I'm going to make that equal to get-ad default domain password policy. And we're going to specify the server. We're going to specify the server, which is the domain. And then all we need to do is add a member into our entry object here. Member type is going to be note property. We're going to put the name here, and we're going to put the name of default domain password policy. And then the value here is, we're just going to put default password policy. Perfect. So if we go ahead, we actually run this code now. And then we're just going to go look at what the all domain info has in here for us. We will actually see that we do see a default domain password policy. So we can actually do this here. If we go all domain info dot default domain password policy, we will actually see that we can actually see the information on our default domain password policy. So that is actually perfect here. So what we can do now is we can already start putting this into our HTML dashboard. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and create a section. And what I want to do is I want to put them at the same level. So we're going to have a default domain password policy, and then right beside it, so very similar to how we made the forest information and then all the domain controllers on the same level, we're going to have to create two things. We're going to have to create nested sections. So let's go ahead and let's create those now. So we're going to have a new HTML section, and then we're just going to have a header text. What I like to do is I do like to put header text here sometimes. And we're just going to put it as password policies. And we're going to make this as invisible anyway. So we're not going to even see this. But if you do ever make it visible, at least it just kind of tells you where things are. It's just a little handy in the future if you need to remove the invisible, or if you do actually want it visible, it kind of just groups things together as well. And then we're going to do a new HTML section once again in here. And we're going to do the header text. This time our header text is going to be the default domain password policy. And then we're going to go ahead and we're just going to open and close the curly brackets here. And then we're just going to copy paste this right underneath as well. And we're just going to say the domain fine-grained password and fine-grained password policies, because there might be more than one for this one. So we have our two sections. And now we can go ahead, we can actually create the panel inside of here. So inside of our first section, we're going to have a new HTML panel. And we're just going to have a open and closing curly brackets. Now here's where we're going to display our default password policy. So what we're actually going to do here is we're just going to put a table. And we're going to do this two ways because I actually prefer it the second way that we're going to be doing it, but you don't necessarily have to do it that way. So we're going to do a table. We're going to specify our data table here. We're going to do a domain dot. It is the default domain password policy, and that should be good. So let's go ahead and let's run this here, and let's see how it looks like. And all right, so there it is. So the reason why I don't necessarily like to just take the information and put it into a table is by default with the PSWriteHTML table, it will convert it into a full-blown table. And for the default domain password policy, since there's only one, I like to display it in a just a little bit of a nicer way than just a table like this. So what I want to do is I want to show you guys how to convert a object in PowerShell to a hash table, and then we're going to display that hash table in the default domain policy instead. You're going to see it looks a little bit cleaner than this. So let's actually just go ahead, let's minimize this so we can actually see the old one and the new one, and let's see what we can actually get it to look like here. So what we actually want to do in this new panel here, what I like to do is just create a new variable called default password policy table. And we're going to make that equal to a hash table. So all we want to do is a @ and then two curly brackets. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a $, a variable wrapper first. And we're going to do the $domain. So we're specifying the domain that we're inside of this for each loop. And we're going to then go ahead and we're going to pipe that to a select expand property default domain password policy. I wonder if this is already kind of contained. No, okay. So we won't be able to predict any, see any values on the console. But we're going to select expand the default domain property here. And then all we're going to do afterwards is do a select statement on here. And we want to select all the different values that we want. So let's just go ahead. Let's just make a select star for now. We're going to select everything for now. And then we're going to see what we actually want to keep later on. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to close the parentheses here. And we're going to do a .ps object .properties. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pipe that to a for each open and close curly bracket default password policy table. I'm pretty sure that's what I named it here. Default password policy table. And then we're going to do a square bracket. So we reference a specific key in here. And our key is going to be a $_. This is going to be referencing the information coming in from the pipe here. dot name, and we're going to make that equal to the $ underscore dot value. Okay, perfect. So that seems to be all good. And then one way that we can actually see this, because I am aware that this actually might be confusing for a lot of people that maybe aren't used to working with this here. I'm just going to try to comment out all of these lines here. Give me one moment. So for each, for each domain here. Okay, so that should be okay. Let's do this here. I'm just trying to show you guys what this actually looks like here. So we're going to do a for each. We're just setting this up here. But what this actually looks like is now if we go and grab the default password policy table, we will see that it has all the values. So the first thing that we're doing is we're grabbing the domain, which right now, if we look at what our domain is, it is the domain, all of our information for this domain. So we have the domain controllers, the domain, and the default domain password policy. If we do a select with the expand property of the default domain password policy, we get the default domain policy for the domain. If we don't have that expand property here, what we actually get is just a very, very simplified version of that default domain policy that doesn't give us a lot of information. So that's why we have this expand property. And then we're doing a select star because we want to grab all the different properties here. And then what we're doing is we're grabbing all the PS object and the properties for it. So if we actually go ahead and we look at it, that's what it looks like. So it actually breaks the object down into each property. So we can actually see the name of this. We can see that it is a note property. So very similarly to how we're creating this entry object, each of these objects are created in the same way. And this is how you can actually see what member type they are. If you can get and set them, you can see a lot of different information. And then what we're doing is we're going and we're piping this information through a for each loop, and we're actually generating the information inside of our hash table. So that's what we're doing here. I am aware that this part is maybe a little bit confusing, but I just wanted to break that down for you guys to show you guys in the console of what exactly that it is that we're doing here. So once we actually have that, instead of doing our data table as our domain.default domain password policy, what we actually want to do is we're going to be pointing it to our default password policy table. And then what we can actually do is run this now, and we should actually see what it looks like. So it's opening up. So now we can actually see what we're getting. And it still looks a little bit rough, and that is okay. So what we're actually going to be doing here now is if we actually expand this out, so we have a name and we have a value here. So what I like to do as well is let's just go ahead. We're just going to minimize this so we can actually see what happens. Is we are now going to want to also do a default sort order, as I like to have this as ascending, and then the default sort column, I will put that as name. And then let's go ahead and let's see what we actually want to select. So we want to select, let's go ahead and we want to have the reversible encryption enabled, the max password age, min password length, lockout duration, complexity enabled, password history count, the lockout threshold, and the lockout observation window. Now, I actually already have all of these typed out because I do not want to bore you guys with typing all of these out. Now, of course, you can select the properties that you guys want to have. So once we actually have all these properties picked out here, we can actually run this code. And this is what it looks like now once we actually have just the subset of the values that we want. Because a lot of those properties that you're going to find in the object aren't actually at all really related to the password policy, but more just related to a PowerShell object. So then the only thing that I really like to do, like we said in the other video for here, is I like to remove the buttons and the footer here just to make that a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead and let's do the hide footer, hide buttons, and that should be good now. So if we go ahead, we run this again, we actually have all these values, and you can actually still search. The search is still a valid option here. So that could be nice for some people, especially if you have a lot of domain controllers, you can search for your domain controllers still. The search probably isn't very handy in the default domain password policy, but I like to have it there anyways, just in case you want to just look up password. You can easily just type in the password and it'll bring that up instead of having to look for it. So now the only thing that we have left is the domain fine-grained password policies. And this is going to be a lot easier than what we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and let's add in the fine-grained password policy into our object. So we're going to create a variable called fine-grained policies, and we're going to do a get AD fine-grained password policy on the server, and we're going to specify domain here. And then the filter is going to be star because we want to get every single fine-grained password policy. And we're going to, once again, we're going to add a member here, and we're going to say domain fine-grained password policies. And let's just go ahead and let's just reference this variable for the value here for fine-grained password policies. So now that we have all of those, now the only thing that we need to actually do is, once again, create our new HTML panel in the proper section. New HTML panel. And let's go ahead, open and closing curly brackets. And all we're going to do here is we're going to do a table in this case. Because there could be multiple fine-grained password policies, I definitely prefer it to show in the actual default report or table looking that we are used to with PSWriteHTML. But I do like to make a few little changes here. So we're going to specify our data table, and then we're going to wrap this in a variable wrapper, and we're going to do a domain, and we're going to do the select. Once again, we need to expand that property of the, just remember what we called it here. It is the domain fine-grained password policies. So now if we actually just do it like this here, it will actually work. It'll be exactly kind of what we want it to be. It'll just have a lot of information that we might not necessarily want. So here is a lot of the information. Once again, there are a lot of extra properties. So what I like to do is, once again, just kind of select the ones that I actually want. So what I like to do is I like to just pipe this to a select statement in here. And I have this one as well written out already. But I like to select the name, the complexity enabled, lockout duration, lockout observation window, lockout threshold, max password age, min password length, password history count, and reversible encryption enabled. And once we actually have that in here, we can actually hit the run button. And there it is. It's a lot easier to read now. We can actually see what the name of the fine-grained password policy is. and we can see all the information. The only thing really left to do is just kind of hide these buttons and hide the footers. And then the other thing is, in case you haven't noticed, we don't see this in the forest because we actually fixed this in the forest other than the domain controllers. But there is like some like little overlapping here. If you want to remove that, if you don't want that aesthetic look, you can actually just simply put the, I believe it is just the panel as invisible, I believe. I don't think that that actually deletes it. But we can go ahead, we can actually try that. Yeah, so there it is. It just removes that kind of like 3D-ish look to it. Some people like it, some people don't. I will just make these invisible. It kind of just looks a little bit flatter. Looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion, a little bit less hard to look at for some people. So once we actually have all of those, that is all good. So we actually run this once again. We don't have any like little pop-up here that might look weird to some people. And we can just actually remove these buttons as well. Go ahead and let's do that. Let's do the hide footer, hide buttons. Once again, let's just go ahead, let's run it. And there it is. So there is our domain fine-grained policies, and there's our forest information, and there's our information on our domain. Now we don't have the domain controllers just yet in here, but that is actually super easy to do because we already have basically that created here. So we can actually create a section right above password policies. We can just do a new HTML section, header text. We can say domain controllers, and then have a open and closing curly bracket, and then just do a new HTML panel. And once again, we're just going to put that as invisible, so it's just a standard look. And then we're going to put a table, data table. And all we're going to do is go ahead and put in the we can do a domain. So we actually have two methods of doing this here. We can actually just do the domain object. That's what I'm going to be doing this way. We actually have all the information on the main page. We're really specifying some select pieces of information for the domain controller, but on the domain page itself, I actually do like to have everything here. So let's just do a select domain controller. We're just going to do the expand property here. And if we go ahead, we run this, we can actually see the domain controller on this list here. And because we aren't like specifying any select statements, we are getting everything back. So this again would probably be more of a personal preference. I actually like to display all the information in this case because we are actually specifically on the domain. We're not on the forest level where I just like to really just kind of give a quick overview of everything. This is a little bit more in depth, but we can go ahead and just remove the buttons once again here. So we can just do a hide footer and then hide buttons here. And if we go ahead and we run this, we will see that we get all of our domain controllers are still in there, and we can view all the information and actually see all the different details, the SSL port, the LDAP port, the name, all the different options that we have here for the domain controllers. So now that we've actually added quite a bit into our dashboard here, we still have quite a bit to go. We're going to be adding a section for users and some groups. Also, if you guys want to see anything specific in this dashboard as well, please let me know in the comment section down below, and we can go ahead and we can add that to the dashboard. This way it gives the most benefit to people. And like I said in the last video, at the end of this series, I'm going to be putting it in my GitHub, and I'll be putting the GitHub link in the descriptions of each video, so you guys can go ahead and check that out and put it in your domain and be able to run this dashboard and get a bunch of information on your Active Directory forest or domains that you guys want to actually look at. Thank you guys for watching. Please remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, also hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.